Hi, everybody. Welcome to Nafshi's address for COVID-19. We're all in it together. Thanks very much for coming remotely. I wanted to do a few things. First thing I want to do is have a holy nigun, a holy tune, because music is the language of the soul. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Glad you signed on. I wanted to address our Nafshi community and anybody else who wants to hear my understanding. This is my conceptualization. This doesn't have to fit for anyone, but if it's something that you find helpful, feel free to take that. If not, feel free to share your own thoughts and your own views, because we are all in this together. This is uncharted territory. This is something that affects all of humanity. It's very hard for me to think of this as something that is not of cosmic proportion from a spiritual point of view, because this hits the core of the human condition. And what we do at Nafshi is we speak to the human condition. The word Nafshi actually means a lot of things in Jewish thought. One thing it means is spirituality, and one thing it means is emotionality. Together, the two. So I wanted to use that theme, spirituality and emotionality, or counseling, psychology, to fuse together and hopefully come away with at least a different perspective that I can take for me. And if it's valuable and helpful, you can let me know, and you can share that with yourselves, your families, your loved ones. First, I want to start off that the number one predictor of resilience is being together, being with one another, being at someone's side. When someone's going through pain and hardship, from a Jewish point of view, we call it nosei ba'olim chavero. We call it connecting to another person's pain, really seeing or hearing that person. And connecting, it actually, the word is nosei, it actually lifts the burden that's on someone else's shoulders. And we call that what we call in English easing of the burden. So by being by someone else's side, even if I cannot effectuate a change, my presence, my care, my love, my affection takes away part of that burden. It somehow it shares it, and it lessens a little bit of the load, which is why this particular crisis has been so deflating and so demoralizing to so many and to much of humanity, because it has robbed us of the ability to physically be side by side, to be by one another. However, as you've illustrated here tonight, and I'm grateful, just because we can't physically be by each other's sides, we can digitally be by each other's sides. I got some thumbs up, and really have the potential to connect on new levels, new opportunities of connection. And sometimes it can be the deepest level of connection. So often we're in a world that has a bias. It has a bias towards a Western viewpoint of healing and wellness. We believe that there's holistic wellness. So we even have physicians here who are logged on, and we're relying on you. We're relying on the ingenuity of the greatest of you, the greatest of the medical minds, and we have scientists on the line as well. We're relying on you, and we're praying, and we're hoping that together the greatest of the scientific minds and the medical minds will help us fight this and beat this for everyone who's in pain and suffering. At the same time, there's another dimension of hope that we can give people without the Western medical model. I should say in addition to the Western medical model. And that hope is one that can't be quantified under a microscope. It can't be quantified in a laboratory. And it's very easy to fall into this trap. So I want to dispel some spiritual notions. It's very easy to fall into the trap that if I can't see it, it's not real. This was unfortunately, a gift, I'm saying facetiously, that was bequeathed to us by Yavan, by the Greek philosophers and the Greek school of thought, which is transferred over to Western society, which is, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. Everything we know from a spiritual perspective and what informs us from a counseling perspective is that there are going to be nested layers of reality, nested layers of what it means to be a human other than the protoplasm that you see, other than the skin, other than the muscles, even the brain. There's going to be nested levels of reality under that muscle, whatever that spongy muscle is that so befuddles us as we're still learning. There's going to be something called the mind, which we can't touch, something called consciousness, which we can't measure under a microscope, that we're only beginning to scratch the surface. And just as there's layers of consciousness in the mind, there are layers to a human being that one cannot see. And I would venture to say, many philosophers have stated that the most important aspects of the human condition fall under this category, the aspects of love and connection and warmth. And Nafshi, we believe that life is about relationships. Everything is about relationships, which is why the Torah, our spiritual guide, mission statement, way of life, our essence and our heritage, doesn't speak about religion. It only speaks about relationships. Right now, all of that's under attack. It's all under attack by virtue of our social distancing. So in addition to the incredible pain that people are suffering, some of us have family, some of us have friends, loved ones. We all know people, whether it's in the communities around us or communities, the world community, who have been afflicted. And we are praying for them. Some of us are fasting for them. Even though we all have that, we all know those individuals affected. There's also another layer besides the physical virus, besides the pain that is inflicting on a level of our protoplasm and our body. And that is the attack, the eating away at the core of our psyche, of what it means to be connected in relationships. So this attack is on our core essence of our humanity, which calls for a response on a core essence of our humanity, on a relationship level. I hope this is the first of many that we're going to do together. There are many other groups, but I hope that our group, our Nafshi community, is going to continue things like this, and I'll explain a little bit more of that as we go along. I heard Dr. David Pelkovitz, who's yesterday given an address to counselors and other individuals across the country and across the world about how one might respond to this attack on humanity. And one of the things he said was that it's important to view this not as an event, that COVID-19 is not as much an event as it is a process, which means our way of thinking has collided with an unpleasant reality. Our way of thinking that we have control has just been laid bare to illustrate to us that control has been an illusion, that we don't control much of what we think we control, which control, I might add from a counseling point of view, is fueled by anxiety. The more we want to control is often fueled by our anxiety, and our lack of control also generates and produces anxiety. So we are plagued with an attack of anxiety on two different levels with this new reality. But he encouraged us to view this not as an event. In Dallas, a friend of mine said when we came to Dallas 10 years ago that winter is not as much a season as it is an event. It happens here usually once or twice a year. They're a really bad ice storm. But this would be the opposite. This would be that COVID-19 is not an event, but a process, which means our whole reality may change. It certainly has changed in the interim. It certainly changed in the short term. We don't know how this will affect us in the long term. But viewing that means this is the takeaway, my way of viewing the world is not usable anymore. Everything that I thought is not always so. Now, a thinker in Jewish philosophy, the Jewish philosophers, their great spiritual masters, would say that if we're born on one end of our life spectrum and we pass away, that we hope all we have are blessed with arichut yamim, with long life. We pass away on the other end, which we know is inevitable. Being born is something, an event that happens against our will. We didn't will it, we didn't choose it, we don't control it, we have no input into the class status, socioeconomic, culture, time period, ethnicity, cultural mores. We just land where we land. And if we exit and if we depart from this world, this physical world, we believe in the eternality of the soul, but when we depart from this world, we also have no input. I got a thumbs up. So that means that hopefully, there are bookends of not being in control. And so a thinker, then the spiritual masters will teach us that that whole process in between those bookends means there's a theme. The theme is we don't have the control that we think we do. And that which we think we do is an illusion. And we are in the middle of a process of breaking, very painfully, breaking that illusion. Now, in the Western world, we say that we are disillusioned. We say the word disillusion. If you think about that, in the Western world, that is something negative. And one of my spiritual senseis wants us to encourage us to reflect on that, how absurd it is to feel bad about being disillusioned. Now, it can be very painful. To be disillusioned, is a very painful process. My brother-in-law sent me an article I'm happy to forward to anyone from the Harvard Business Review that had a crossover with some psychology and insight that people are going through a grieving process right now. So in Jewish thought, grieving is, in a sense, a death process. Grieving is referred to as avelut in Hebrew. And the root of avelut is the Hebrew word aval. Visual learner. Aleph Bet Lamed. I know I studied a little bit of this with David, who I can see on here on Tisha B'Av, which is the day set aside for grieving and mourning on our calendar. We're going through a little mini Tisha B'Av right now. Maybe it's not so mini. What we're going through is on Tisha B'Av, a one day set aside for grieving is where we can't hug each other, we can't greet one another, we can't say shalom to one another, all the things that go against our innate drives as affectionate and warm and connected and feeling as one people and one family in the Jewish community. We're experiencing some of that right now when we can't greet one another. And on that day set aside for grief, we come up with the big wall known as avelut, which means my way of viewing the world did not work. My way of viewing the world is over and it has died. And I go through a process of, so to speak, burying my way of viewing the world. So aval in Hebrew, if anybody knows simple Hebrew here, what does aval mean? You can just say it out loud or unmute yourself. I know Josh was there too. We also studied this with Josh. But, exactly right. What was the second thing you said? I heard you say but, and then unmuted yourself. So,
but, I heard aval is but.
Yeah, aval is but, exactly. Or sometimes we say it's however. So, but, B-U-T, or however, is I'm moving along thinking my way of the world is copacetic, and all of a sudden I hit the immutable brick wall that completely shatters my plans and my reality. And that's the pain of the loss, whether it's a loss of a person, the loss of a dream, the loss of an idea. Something can be very abstract. So for many people right now, they're going through a process of avelut. They're going through a process of aval. We pray for all of our loved ones to have a refuah shlema. They should be healed. We pray for all of our friends and the broader community, the Jewish community and the world community in terms of sickness. But in terms of ideas, in terms of our abstract ways of viewing, we're going to have to change much of the reality which we think we can control. how does that play out on an actual practical way? So here, I want to identify something in Kabbalah, in our Kabbalistic teachings, which I think we're going to dissect. And this is where I want to dispel some misconceptions to give hopefully a unique approach spiritually and a unique approach from counseling psychology. And to do this, I want to make an immediate dichotomy between me as an individual, the I, or like we say, the I of the beholder, except the I is in the existential self, and then everybody else in the world. The rest of everything that comes in through our external stimuli, people, friends, family, community, the environment, other creatures of the world, communities, nations, everything that's external that comes to me in one category, and then the existential self in the other. And in Kabbalistic thought, and the great Hasidic masters have revealed this over the last several hundred years. They figured now is the time to allow these hidden insights in the human condition to be exposed to the world. They were heretofore kept under lock and key in a secret compartment that only the most elite scholars of Jewish thought and Jewish lore were able to open and expose. The great Hasidic masters taught us within the last several hundred years, which in Jewish history, is like the blink of the eye. It's very modern if something is just a few hundred years old. So in our modern teachings, they said now is the time because people need hope. We need to give people hope, and we need to let out these secrets that have been kept. And one of them goes like this. It says, Adam olam katan ve'olam Adam gadol, which loosely translates as a human being is a mini world, is a microcosm of the universe. And the universe is a macrocosm of an individual. A person is a mini world, and the world is a very large person. What does that mean? That's very cryptic. So I suggest filtering our experience of the COVID-19 crisis into these two categories. The Adam Katan, the mini world, which is me, which is myself, and everything else, the universe and all of its interconnected and interrelated parts as the entirety of the universe as its own individual entity. So when we hear things about what to do, how to cope, how to heal, how to help one another, I suggest that is related, filtered through the prism of me, the I, and if you're hearing this, I encourage you to filter it through just no more than your existential self. And everyone else relate to a little bit differently. And what do I mean by that? There are people that have been going around and very good intentioned, well-meaning, thoughtful, some of them leaders, some of them political leaders or religious leaders, maybe friends, maybe we've said this a few times, would say, don't worry. Don't worry about what's going on right now. Don't be anxious. On the surface, this is the counterintuitive part from a counseling point of view. On the surface, one could understand where they're coming from. There are even recordings that I found out from years ago during the cholera epidemic. There were great religious leaders who would say things like that in Hebrew, lowly dog, it's very important, don't worry. And it's informed by a certain level of data in counseling psychology, which is that how destructive to one's psyche worry can be. But here's the problem. It is not helpful. When someone tells me, don't worry, it does not minimize my anxiety. Depending on my temperament, it may actually increase my anxiety. It might take the module up on my anxiety rather than decrease it. I don't know if you follow Brian Regan. He's really one of the best comedians. You can give a thumbs up if you know Brian Regan. Everything he does is totally clean. I highly encourage you to just spend some time if you're into stand-up comedy with Brian Regan, R-E-G-A-N. And in one of his soliloquies, he says, it's so interesting how we like to talk to children when they break a toy and we say, don't worry, it's not a big deal. They break a little something and they say, oh, we'll get you a new one. It's all right. What are we trying to do? On the surface, it seems like we are trying to reduce their anxiety, to minimize their worry. But it's not actually what's happening on a nested level of consciousness. On the surface, it sounds like that. But what's really happening is I'm really trying to minimize my anxiety over my child's pain, my child crying. So I'm encouraging the child, don't worry, don't be anxious. This is not a big deal. I'm trying to minimize this to the outer world, to the external reality, to the universe, instead of speaking about it to myself, instead of giving myself that message. So Brian Regan says, it's like when a kid's toy breaks and we say, don't worry, we'll get you another one. Stop crying, stop doing this. Brian, someone's asking, yeah, Brian Regan, B-R-I-A-N, Regan. Highly encourage you to look him up if you're into it before you go to sleep. You got it. He's performed in Israel a lot also. He's not Jewish, but I think he's a mensch. I can't vouch for all of his comedy. All of his comedy is clean. Can't vouch for, but almost all of it is right on the money, according to my taste. And he says it's like telling a kid not to cry when their toy is broken. He said it's like, imagine you're walking along the beach and all of a sudden someone comes up and takes your wallet out of your back pocket of your bathing suit or your purse and throws it into the ocean. And I start, oh my God, my wallet. Don't worry. What do you worry? We'll get you another one. It's no big deal. Stop it. Don't worry about it. Right? We have, thanks Josh for sharing the Brian Regan. So what we're doing is we're not actually helping by telling people not to worry. It's an attempt to manage our own anxiety. So this is where I want to make this dichotomy. For ourselves, if we want to, we can try to give ourselves the don't worry talk. It's not always helpful, as we'll see as we go along here. It's not always helpful, but it might be helpful if it's entirely directed at myself because I'm trying to quiet that voice of anxiety in my own head. But it's not helpful to somebody else. It's like the great Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky said regarding drug addicts in the 1980s. You might remember this is what your brain looks like on drugs, those commercials. One of the slogans was, just say no, right? Just say no. So the great Rabbi Dr. Twersky said, telling a drug addict to just say no is like telling a homeless person, just buy a house. Just go buy a house. It misses everything that led up to the pain. It misses the etiology. It misses the healing. It misses the coping. It's a solution that's not helpful, that is not usable. So the easy mistake, this is what's counterintuitive, is right now, when we hear people telling us not to worry, really the opposite would be helpful. And this is a counseling point of view confirmed by Dr. Pelkovitz and others, which is rather than denying the feeling, rather than pushing that feeling down, expressing the feeling of anxiety, expressing the feelings of worry is actually what's most helpful. Feel free to weigh in if you want to unmute yourself. Feel free to talk about this. By getting very real with myself, by admitting when I'm feeling anxious, what I actually do is I let it out rather than stuff it down in my system. Because what happens when I push it down, it doesn't go away. Now I can pretend like it goes away. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to say something, Dr. Beltouche, if you wanted to add to this. But they say, Dr. Pelkovitz said, emotions are like a pipeline. So if I'm clogged up in one emotion, it's gonna numb, it's gonna stop up many processes in my entire emotional well-being and my wellness. So from a holistic point of view, my healing is going to be hindered by trying to deny the emotionality. Telling me not to worry invalidates my feelings. What we need now is a validation of our feelings. And that means for all of us, whether we're kids or whether we are adults. And in fact, children are going to pick up on our anxiety. So typically, it always starts with us. And that's why I wanted to encourage this filtering from the Kabbalistic point of view on the existential self. This entire talk is really about me and trying to help me. And if this is helpful for you, I encourage you to also filter it for you, but never to tell it to impose it on anybody else. To impose something on somebody else is not giving honor and letting their natural voice come out. So it's not hearing someone, it's not seeing someone. And that's what we started at the beginning. The greatest predictor of resilience and outcomes for people who go through tremendous trials and pain and tragedy is, will somebody be there for me to give me hope on the other side, which is why there's so many great outcomes of people who are hospitalized when people pray for them. There's so many different outcomes when people are visiting the sick, when they're there by them. We're going to do that to the best of our ability in a virtual community. If there are any questions at this point, weigh in.
I have a question. Can
Please.
you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, you could hear?
I can hear you.
Sorry. Um, how can you reconcile the admission of feeling anxious or out of control with the goal and ideal of being so one who has emunah and bitachon, etc.?
Yeah, great question. If I understand it correctly, this idea of emunah and bitachon, so the Hebrew words for this great faith and belief and trust in God. So the first thing I want to talk about just the definition. So in Jewish thought, we use the word faith. We sometimes translate in English as faith, but it doesn't actually translate as faith, because in the Western world, when we say faith, it actually has come to have a connotation of irrational belief, right? That's what faith. That's what I mean. People say, "Well, I don't have evidence, so I have faith." Or they say a leap of faith. A great movie about this is Contact. If you have like 6 or 7 hours and you just want to watch an old one, but it's very, very good. And it talks about this idea of like this leap of faith. But in Jewish thought, some of you are probably familiar, emunah doesn't actually mean that. It doesn't mean to have faith in the sense of an irrational belief in something I can't see, but it actually means faithfulness, which also you can hear in the English connotation of I'm faithful to someone. Doesn't mean I believe in this person's going to come through and there's been no factual evidence. It's almost the opposite. It's because of the evidence of a relationship with someone, I can trust that person because of all of the evidence. So I am faithful to that person. That person is faithful to me. It's a commitment of relationship. So I just want to get that definition because that's very important. Because sometimes we can get confused with non-Torah ideas that infiltrate either through the Western world, through language, for many, many other reasons, or just because of our own needs, for our own psychological needs. And the proof for what I'm saying is just in the word emunah. You can trace it all over the Torah, particularly what we say every morning. For those of you who say modeh ani or moda ani lefanecha, as I thank, I praise, or I'm at a point of admission that my life is totally entrusted in God's hands. I use the word God. You could say Hashem, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, greater consciousness, a higher power, whatever you want to say. But when I admit that I'm in God's hands every morning, when I'm through sleeping, and I open up my eyes and say, thank you, Hashem, for giving me my neshama. So in Hebrew, the last two words are Rabba emunatecha. Rabba emunatecha means emunah. Emunatecha is a contraction, which means your faithfulness. So we're talking to our divine being. We're talking to Hashem and saying, you are faithful. You have Rabbah. You have enormous faithfulness. How could that mean faith? We would say that God believes in us irrationally. That's one of the reasons, one of the textual reasons to back up and support what I'm describing about the definition. So now that we have a definition, I think I know that was long-winded, but almost everything I say is long-winded. So now the question is going to be, how do we reconcile this idea of I'm worried and I'm anxious with, I also want to project myself as having this unwavering emunah in Hakadosh Baruch Hu, in God Almighty, in divine consciousness. So I think if we look at it through the prism of the definition which I just said, the question might go away. Dr. Baltouche, you can add to that if you want. I don't see you anymore, so I'm not sure if you're still on, and anybody else can pick up and piggyback off of that question too. But if you filter it that way, I'm no longer projecting an image of blind faith in something abstract. It means I am faithful to that which I believe in, and to whom I believe in, and to the one who has given me life and breath and consciousness, and to be able to have this discussion, to move my fingers and my muscles, to be able to have thought processes, to be able to walk, to be able to relate, all of the gifts and the things that I should have gratitude about. If I'm faithful to that relationship, then I don't have to be superhuman. To not have worry and not have anxiety is often somebody who's not really human, who's not very real. Follow up?
I'm sorry. Yes, the battery died. I had to plug
Oh,
in. So I missed like 2 minutes there. Can you you defined faithfulness, and I caught you at the end.
yeah, no problem. The short of it is, I don't have to be superhuman. Like, people think that, I was just having this conversation with someone. I don't have to be someone who never is afraid. Someone who's courageous from a counseling point of view, someone who's courageous is not someone who has no fear, but it's someone who's willing to stare their fears in the face, who's willing to face those fears. And to do that, we need support from one another. We need support from a higher being and a higher power. But it doesn't mean I don't have those feelings, those sentiments. And this, I think, this is a spiritual mistake that is made often. Rabbi Dr. Twersky speaks about this at length and writes about this. We like to think that having anger is a transgression. It means it's a sign of our not being spiritually fit. But really the opposite is true. Because anger is an emotion. I'm not talking about raging. I don't encourage raging at anyone in particular. The behaviors are not okay that may come from anger, but the feeling of anger just means that we're human. So in something like this, to feel worried, to feel anxiety, and anxiety, just to define it, anxiety is fear of the unknown. So there are fears of real events and of real challenges, and then anxiety, it's a fear that doesn't have a specific cause, and that's why it can be so terrifying. And when people try to control, when people are controlling, it's often fueled by their anxiety, because I'm trying to manage what is unmanageable, except it doesn't work. It tends to produce more anxiety also in the long run. So the not so short answer, to make a long story endless, as some people say, getting very, very real. And this is not just me. You can ask Dr. Pelkovitz or Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb, who is our Nafshi spiritual and counseling mentor, who is actually featured on the cover of Ami magazine this today or this week, and talking about the response to Corona. I'm hoping that Rabbi Dr. Weinreb will also give a Nafshi address as a follow-up to this one, if you wanted to ask him directly. And others will say that getting very real with your feelings is the best way to deal with COVID-19. It's the best way to let it out. So when tear ducts, when people cry, the studies say when it's emotional crying, it's completely separate anatomically than tears that just happen for if someone sometimes people are cold and they're going to tear, or they're cutting an onion and they tear. If there's no emotionality to it, then it's just salt and water on a physiological level. But they found stress hormones in tears when they are cried from emotionality. When the tears come out from pain, you're actually excreting pain from the body. When I deny that I'm angry, the anger doesn't disappear. It just goes down in my body somewhere, and it makes me physically ill, emotionally ill, spiritually ill, and it serves as a blockage to let my holistic self really flow. And the same is going to be true with the worry and with the anxiety. If I don't get very real with my worry and anxiety, whether it's I'm trying to put up a front because I'm a counselor, I'm a rabbi, or I'm an Abba, if I don't get very real with the things that I'm afraid of, then they're just going to go down into me and create blockages. Thumbs up. Okay. Again, I'm sharing counseling ideas and some spiritual ideas. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. You can feel free to weigh in. And this is meant to be just the beginning of a longer discussion, just to try to help people walk away and frame things a little bit. So we spoke about how we are to view. Well, sometimes I know not everyone is a parent, But if you are a parent, or if you're in a position to be around children, children's anxiety is likely to be very high right now, as you can imagine, as anyone else's. Knowing that it's okay. I hear a little bit of my screen went out. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're still good. Yeah, my screen's still good. I'm getting a few questions if we're still on. Yeah, we're still on. There may be some technical difficulties, but this is part of our new reality also, right? This is part of my wanting to control things. All these platforms that I'm doing for counseling and digital help, what's happening right now is they are sometimes failing because there are so many people who are. That's another good example. It's like I don't know if you can mute whoever is. Let's see if I can do it. I think I did it. Yeah, I think I muted. These are things that sometimes this could just knock off, and we have no way to control it. And it's not necessarily any platform that fails. It's just the number of people logging on to Zoom at one time might just knock us off. Not because there's anything wrong with Zoom or any of these other programs, but from what I understand, it's just because of just overloaded here. And so we're kind of like the same way. When we're overloaded with the body, this is another spiritual principle and a counseling idea. The body is not meant to deal with chronic stress. This is also from Dr. Pelkovitz. To have chronic stress 24 hours a day is very bad for our bodies. So I want to give just a few coping ideas, and we'll talk about macro healing, but in the short term, coping. The difference I would say between coping and healing, coping will be certain strategies, behavioral strategies that we can employ that can be helpful during this time. And then healing will look at a deeper nested layer of reality inside of us. But the coping strategies, one is going to be exercise. And that's why Nafshi is going to be hopefully offering a very accomplished trainer who does boot camps here in Dallas. His name is Doug Rice. He's a good friend, is a very holy brother. We're hopefully going to be offering online exercise facilitated, so in your own home, whatever degree you can with whatever you have, will be just some exercise if you want to. There are going to be a million ways to do this, even with social distancing and responsible aspects of our new reality. But exercise is actually going to be an antidepressant. It's actually something that will physiologically create, and the reason why that happens in very brief layman's terms, it's not just the endorphins that are released by exercise, but when my mind becomes engaged in a task that requires all of the efforts of my body, so all of my neurological processes are activating everything in my body in a sense of some stimulus is coming my way, and I have to respond to it, and I get completely mindful in that activity, especially if it's one that we enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, it's a little bit more difficult and may not have the same results. But the more I do that, the more my mind gets trained to respond to problem-solving situations, survival situations, because our amygdala, the animal brain, doesn't know when a challenge is going to be life or death, survival. It's going to trigger the same response. When I'm able to engage every part of my body for a sustained period, it's activating all of those neuroprocesses which I need to get from my amygdala to my frontal lobe. Oh, do I see, just asked if I see a chat. Some people will tell me not to worry, and those people I trust and I actually want them to tell me that, it may not be completely invalidating. Okay, so this is great. So the people who tell you not to worry, you're, thanks for checking in on this, Mrs. Yachnes, I appreciate it. The people who are telling you not to worry, you feel it is validating. That's fine. That's getting back to that dichotomy, which is I would just encourage everyone not to tell anybody else not to worry. And you could tell me that we're in a logical loop here. I'm telling you not to tell people, and they're telling you that's fine too. But I would just say if you gain from someone telling you not to worry, that's great. It goes back to the great spiritual master Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who said, we're paraphrasing here. He said that people are always concerned with my maximizing my profits and my material wealth. We look at everybody else, so we look down on everyone else's spirituality. This person isn't religious enough or spiritual enough. He said it should be the opposite. I should be primarily concerned with my spirituality, with how I'm improving on an ethical level, and I should be concerned with everybody else's material wealth and try to help everybody else try to make sure that their basic needs are met food and clothing and shelter. So right now, one of the greatest things you can do is start chesed, start acts of kindness and encouraging others to be giving as much as you can. There are ways to do this virtually. There are ways to do it in your own homes. There are ways to do it through our resources. And Dr. Pelkovitz encouraging children to help others as best they can wherever they are. And this is true for us as well. When we get into the habit of helping, it's going to do something for us. So the same thing is true. When I look at myself and when I tell myself not to worry, that's different than telling other people not to worry. So if you tell me that minimizes your anxiety, that's fine. That's okay too. And let's actually let's go to that right after I go through a few more different suggestions for coping. While we still have time, we'll wrap this up at the end of the hour. But one of the other coping techniques besides exercise is going to be music. We're also going to be offering some concerts, some online kumsitz where you can bring your own instruments, enjoy. We did the little one before Shabbat. We're going to be doing some others, hopefully connecting with people in Zoom or other platforms around the world. And I may send out also some very spiritual songs. And you can feel free to share. I know there are people here who are Yosef Karduner fans, and others. I know Joey Newcomb is kind of new. My son really likes him. I'm really into him also. Really spiritual ideas and messages through song and through sound really have the capability of lifting us up. So music, I would highly encourage. Exercise, I would encourage from a wellness point of view. Also laughter. We spoke about it briefly. Laughter I would highly encourage, whether it's Brian Regan or anybody else. The 24-hour chronic stress is going to be corrosive to our immune system, among other things. Our emotionality for sure, but our immune system as well is not meant to live with that chronic survival mode. And so I would encourage a laugh. I would even say it to people who I counsel who are dealing with terminal illnesses. I would encourage taking a break to do something light, to do something fun. And this was really evinced by the late and the great Jimmy Valvano, or Jimmy V for all the sports fans out there, who even when he was stricken with cancer, and I encourage you to look up this clip when he was talking at the ESPY Awards, but he said this at other times also in the early 90s, when he was dying, when he had tumors all over his body, he said that everyone, in his view, should laugh every day, cry every day, and think every day. And there's a yesh omrim. There's an alternative view that when he said think, he really meant pray. So there are those that say pray. So if you do those things every day, he said that's really the ingredients to a really special life. I'm not doing it justice. You really have to see Jimmy Valvano if someone wants to put it up here, or Jimmy V. There's a whole foundation from Jimmy V. And what he did, what we're doing here, is we're learning how to be really comfortable or uncomfortable, but managing through the discomfort with the idea that the world doesn't go my way. It wasn't meant to be this way, but I can stare down anything in the face. I can stare down my worst fear and emerge out of it stronger on the other side. That's what in Counseling the World, Brene Brown and others talk about resilience. And that's what in the spiritual point of view, that's what these spiritual teachers, that's what they mean when they say don't worry. And this is the part that maybe will be helpful for Mrs. Yachins, which is, or just something to think about, which is what they're trying to encourage us is not to despair, and that each one of us has the inner resolve to face whatever life throws at us. And whether we like it or not, we're all being put to this spiritual test. We're all being put in uncomfortable, sometimes very uncomfortable situations, depending on who we are, depending on our circumstance, whether the illness has us or has loved ones, or whether we're just inconvenienced, or whether we just can't handle the stress and the anxiety. We are being forced to deal with the deepest recesses of ourselves and our souls. And we're being challenged to see, what are we really made of spiritually? Okay, I got a recommendation to wrap this up and to ask you what your biggest challenges are. Okay, well, just to sum up then, with this recommendation to wrap up and to ask people what their questions and their challenges are, the theme here, whether you're Jimmy V and you're facing terminal cancer, or whether we have no idea what's going to happen with our jobs and our livelihoods, whether we are scared because of what's happening to our children, to honor all of those feelings, and hopefully for ourselves, not to tell this to anybody else external, but for our own selves, to realize, to get to a point where we go from, as one of my colleagues put it, she would say, going from a victim to a victor. So I encourage you to look at this transformation as going from co-victim to co-victor for this COVID-19, to realize that there's nothing that life can throw at us which is going to knock us down, to make us despair, that we will rise to the occasion, we will find the inner reserves of strength. And if it sounds too hard or not realistic, you can reach out for help. It's okay to ask for help. And when we're not there, when we're not in those places, to really honor those feelings and not beat ourselves up because we're not perfect. It's okay to be human. It's okay to be afraid and to have worry and to have fear about this, but that we'll get through it together, where it's so important to have a relationship with God and it's so important to have a relationship with others. And we're going to be something, we're going to forge that external to self, higher power relationship by our Nafshi community to try to help others do this at the same time. So this is, I guess, where I was encouraged to wrap up. I would like to do a follow-up if anybody is interested on another night, on another occasion, because of a particularly poignant tie-in to this time of year. I really want to tie this into Pesach, to tie this into Passover that we're all going through. Logistically, we're going through stress with Passover, but also spiritually, this is the perfect time to be faced with this, because Passover, very, very short, is about freedom. And freedom, the last of the freedoms of Viktor Frankl pointed out so well in the 20th century, is that the freedom to choose how to respond, the last freedom in the human condition is our ability to choose our response. And when we are completely left without control, as many of us find ourselves right now, what we do have still is the freedom to choose to not be victims or co-victims to the voices in our own heads, but to choose to be survivors and to, as my friend Rabbi Jeremy Litton says, surthrivers, that we can thrive and thrive in circumstances that we can't control, that we didn't ask for, that we don't want, and see what we're really made of, and respond in an existential, spiritual way. The answer is yes. It can be forwarded. We are going to post this talk, but I hope to have follow-up talks as well, and to see this theme really come alive. How amazing would it be to come alive this Passover, wherever you are, whether you're in self-quarantine or forced quarantine or otherwise? How special would it be to experience freedom on a deeper level than you've ever experienced it in your life? That there's always a choice. There's always an ability to go against my own nature of wanting to despair and to rise to the occasion. And the proof of this, I know I've said I'm going to end, but it's very hard to end. The joke is that we say goodbye, but we never leave. In the sense, that's why in Eternia, in Masters of the Universe, that everyone knows from the 1980s, I'm sure everyone knows here, we never say goodbye, we just say good journey. And that's echoed also in Israel today. We say Nesiat Tova, we say good journey. We don't really ever say goodbye, but we just say good journey. So here we are. How great would it be in our journey for Pesach to look at the real essence of freedom? And that freedom is so evinced, like the worst tragedy and pain out there that one could ever imagine, in every class and every talk that you would give, or any perspective on suffering. Viktor Frankl would talk about suffering of the Holocaust. The suffering in World War II, of course, is going to be horrific. There are talks and fears about that right now, what the world is like, if there's a depression coming, God forbid, whatever's happening. But nothing can touch the suffering of the Holocaust. We all know it. And even in the worst situation one could imagine, that's the logical extreme. Even there was always a choice that people had, and we saw people of the most incredible strength and resilience to choose to respond in different ways. And when they couldn't control anything, the last choice that you would have for someone is to go to someone who is in one of the death camps and ask that person who would feel completely hopeless and completely helpless, what can you do? And one response was, do you know how many people I can listen to? I can listen to their pain and their stories and ease that burden and take a burden off of each other. I can choose to have an ear. And we can't do that physically, but we can do that digitally right now. And the other response was, I can choose that if I could trade places with that Nazi who's guarding me, or choose to be where I am, I would choose to be where I am. If the only other choice was to be that vile evil individual. I would choose to be in the worst suffering in all of history, in all the world's history. I would choose that rather than trade places with someone who is choosing an act of evil. So there are always choices, there's always freedom, and we're going to we'll wrap up here for all the questions. Okay, I have a private question. Questions about Passover, not being with family, not being with friends. This is going to be an extraordinarily challenging one for almost everybody. I might go out on a limb and say everybody this year. And it said, I'm shocked at the prospect of not being with family and friends. Please help us understand how to experience the significance of Pesach without young children who make the event always so meaningful. That's a great question. It's going to take a lot longer. I actually will, hopefully let's plan, we'll do a follow-up pre-Passover preparation actually for what to do at your Seder and to hopefully bring to life some of these points of view about freedom. I do have a lot of thoughts on what to do and how to make Passover special without little children. I think we're going to have to save that though for a whole session in and of itself, if there's demand, if there's request. Otherwise, I can speak to you privately about this, kind, blessed person who asked that question. Yes, any other thoughts or questions, either on the chat or anybody who wants to unmute yourself? What about people quarantined at home alone for the Seder? Could you be a little more specific about your question? While we're waiting for more specific, what about people quarantined at home? I mean, we should pray for them. We should let them know how much we care about them, how much we love them, how much we're connected to them. Certainly, digitally, I would recommend doing it before the holiday and then during the intermediate days and afterwards. Yeah, could you still elaborate what you mean exactly? What do we do about that? How to help them have the Seder alone? Oh, and I guess your question is if you have adult children or elderly parents who are alone, how to help them prepare for doing it alone? How to help them have the Seder alone? Well, anyone can reach out to me. Have anyone who's going to be going through the Seder alone reach out to me, and we can also incorporate that when we go through our pre-Seder preparation. Really, it's a broader question, not just having the Seder alone, but it's really how does one be alone? How does one be alone with oneself? The Seder makes it really, really painful, but really that question is all the time, how does one tolerate being alone with oneself? And this is also something we're being forced to deal with right now. We're being forced to deal with how to be alone. I see what you're saying, to tell your story. Okay, well, there's a very specific answer to that. Even if a person is totally alone, and this is brought forth explicitly by our spiritual masters, you tell the story to yourself in dialectical fashion as if there were somebody else there. And this is very explicit throughout the millennia. If you are alone during the Seder, it is called Haggadah. The Seder Haggadah means to tell and to relate. And to give you just 60 seconds on this, to give you an answer, it really requires at least an hour. But to give you 60 seconds on the answer is, the essence of freedom is through our ability to relate to one another in both forms of the word relate. Relate means to tell, lehagid, but in Hebrew, lehagid also means to bind close one another. To relate means relationship. So we are called speaking selves, speaking individuals is the essence of our humanity. And when we were imprisoned, when we were enslaved as a people, the Israelites in Egypt, what were taken away from the Jewish people, I can send you a lot of sources on this if you would like to, both in Hebrew and in English. What was taken away was our ability to speak, our ability to relate to one another. So the primary way to express our freedom, our resilience, our ability to face all of our fears and to rise to the occasion is through articulation, is through language, which is why the holiday is called Pesach on a Kabbalistic level. Pesach, it's a contraction, means the speaking mouth. The Haggadah means telling. And everything we do, all the expressions of telling are all language-based throughout the evening. So that's the 60 seconds on language. If you're all alone, encourage people to tell the story as if you are speaking to another human being. Ask questions as if you're speaking to another human being, and respond to those questions if you're another human being. We'll have to give an hour later to elaborate on that. And then the sub question of that is how to tolerate being alone. We'll have to do a follow-up session on being alone, which is another coping technique we have, which is meditation. And I heard from my wife shared Rabbi Daniel Katz for the Elevation Project just this week. He mentioned that in Hebrew, being in isolation is called nidui, and the same root in Hebrew for isolation is for meditation, hitbodedut. Badad yashav, that we are when we are alone. Aloneness does not always mean loneliness. Loneliness is painful often. Aloneness is actually something essential for our spiritual growth. We have just distracted ourselves for so long in the Western world that we don't know how to be alone with ourselves. So mindfulness and meditation, which also is going to be a Nafshi offering online. You can message me or just stay posted for our meditation times this week. That will be a tool and a technique to help us with our holistic wellness, but also to practice being alone in a broad sense and having value to that in hitbodedut. Then to get to the specific question, also we have here from mental health point of view, being completely alone. Let me see if I can respond to this one. Trying to go back up on the chat. Being completely alone, for those of you who are observant, and if you're ritually observant during the 3-day Yom Tov, means no digital connection. So our one way to relate to one another, which is virtually digitally, is going to be disconnected. So if it were me, if I were going through essentially a 3-day darkness, like a 3-day solitary confinement, I would be very resentful. I might be very angry also. But if I were very spiritually fit, and if I want to have a process to get there without any shame or blame on myself, what I would do is I would prepare as much as I can. We have 2 weeks, I think, from tonight. Happy Rosh Chodesh Nisan, everybody. Also, this is the month of redemption. In a sense, also, this is really like the new year. Because there are two ways of viewing the year in the Jewish calendar, Nisan and Tishrei. This, in a sense, is really actually the beginning of a new year, a new start, new challenges, as we know, a lot of pain for us to persevere through. But as we start Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it's 2 weeks from tonight that we are going to have a Seder. I would work on a spiritual regimen to flex one's spiritual muscles of aloneness between now and then. You can message me privately if you'd like to on how to do that. But I would actually start building and preparing for that through a lot of the things we mentioned: music, meditation. I would get a lot to read. That's why people joked that we're called the people of the book, and we may be the only ones who still have books after our digital age because of our Shabbat, our Sabbath observance and Yom Tov. To get a lot of books and writings ahead of time, get really comfortable and prepare for that alone time with oneself, which can actually be extraordinarily invigorating. We're so used to, and me included, I'm so used to doing instead of what they say, a human being is just being. A human doing is doing on the go, trying to accomplish all the time. Being accomplished is trying to be out in the world and interface and distract. Movies, television, media, social media, all of these things are tools that can be very helpful, but they can also take me away from my essential experience of myself. So I would say you could private message me, or I can refer you to other spiritual or counseling individuals to prepare yourself for this upcoming 3-day Yom Tov in 2 weeks from now. But the essential spiritual preparation is going to be, can I get real comfortable with myself? And it can be a level of self-discovery, which can be the most rewarding that you've ever felt in your entire life. And to be connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be connected to a higher power, can also enhance your relationship with Hashem, with God, in a way that you've never had in your entire life. Thanks, everybody. I think we're going to wrap it up here. And thanks, everybody, for signing in, tuning in. We'll do follow-ups, one before Pesach, specifically about Passover and what we're dealing with, any challenges. Stay tuned also for some kumzits, musical, pre-Shabbat and otherwise, and also for some meditation. We'll get into some of our meditation and mindfulness muscles as well. Lots of love to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chodesh Tov. Shana Tova. It's our hope and our wish that Hashem sends healing to everybody who is physically ill, spiritually ill, gives strength to each of us. And I hope we can continue together in our community of love and friendship and blessing to have a wonderful Nisan, a wonderful year, a wonderful Pesach, and a wonderful Geulah on all levels of redemption for ourselves, the Jewish people, and humanity. Lots of love.